Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a great pleasure to speak to a Nordiska Patientrådet conference. And my remit today is about education, healthcare professional education rather than for patients, and about getting it right for the future. Now, it's not a magic wand, it won't happen immediately. Education is, and what people learn and then changing practice, is a very long process, but we do have to start somewhere. Not that we haven't been doing it for a long time, we've been doing it in different ways, different priorities. This two projects that I'm really going to talk about. The first is about the lymphedema education benchmark statements or standards that came about through work with the International Lymphoedema Framework. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the programme that I was responsible for. I've now retired, so somebody else is leading that. I still do some teaching on it, but the one that we were providing at Glasgow University. Now that isn't perfect, it's not going to work everywhere, but it might just be interesting to see how we did it and how it works and why I think it works quite well in Scotland. So, to talk about the International Lymphoedema Framework project first, it's been going for a number of years. I think it started about 2010, so that gives you an idea of how long things take to happen. And we started off with an international group of professionals and patients, and Margaret was part of that. I think Helena, Karen, you not at some meetings, no? But it was multi-professional. They had doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, massage therapists, a whole variety of people trying to look at, well, what was the priority? What did we really want to do to make things better by educating people about lymphedema? And everybody wanted to do everything. There was a huge long list of all the things that we needed to do for education. And the question that really helped us focus that down to what we really needed to do was, what will make the biggest difference to people with or at risk of lymphedema? Now, I appreciate people here, some have lipödem, and some of it is relevant to that, or a similar approach can be used, but we were primarily focusing on lymphedema. So that helped a great deal, because we know that if lymphedema could be detected early, or sometimes in people that are at risk, and referred, and early treatment, early advice, early information, people wouldn't get such severe lymphedema. It would be caught much earlier, much easier to treat. So it was decided that that would make the biggest difference. If we could do something that would help people to be identified early and treated early, help and support given early. And the problem is that lymphedema specialists are referred people too late, or at least that was the pattern. So it was felt that if we actually could raise awareness of people who are not specialists in lymphedema, probably don't know anything or much about it at all, but if we could get them as early on as possible, raise that awareness so that they could at least recognise it, they knew where to refer people to, and they could offer at least some helpful support and advice, that would make a difference. So again, we looked at, well, what would that look like, what education would be required, and who would it involve. So we thought it was all healthcare professionals. We thought patients had a role to play too, because if the more you ask about it, the more people are prompted to think, well, there must be something more than this. And we also felt that there still needed to be specialist education, but perhaps that's not the priority. We're in a world where there's limited resources in healthcare. We know that there's not going to be lots more money put into increasing specialist services or providing education to train specialists. So again, the priority needs to be much earlier on. What can patients do to help themselves? How can they be supported to do it? And getting that much wider audience of healthcare professionals, at least with some basic education, seemed to be the way to go. So you've probably seen this kind of triangle quite a lot with the kind of what we call standard care or basic care at the bottom, which everybody requires, and the same goes for the people who provide it. They're the biggest group. And then there's the people that have access to education of lymphedema, like perhaps skin care professionals, oncology specialists, particularly breast cancer nurses and units were usually quite well provided for in education. But the focus was generally on lymphedema specialists, so we thought that needed to be kind of reversed, so we put more attention into the frontline general healthcare professionals. And what my experience was that it was the specialists themselves that were responsible for educating people. So they would run workshops, seminars, short courses for the people in their area. But again, the more time they spend in education, they're less on clinical, and it's a bit of a conflict in terms of how they spend their time. So we wanted more time in the generalists. So then we had to think, well, what do they need to know to be able to promote that early prevention, to recognise it early, to refer on? And again, the question, what should a patient be able to expect from any qualified health professionals, like a doctor, nurse, therapist, who is not a specialist in lymphedema? You don't want to, it can take years, certainly in the UK, it was taking people years to actually find their way to an appropriate specialist who could give them the correct treatment, so we couldn't wait that long. The problem is that people who are teaching generalists don't have a good understanding themselves about lymphedema. They, I don't know if this is the lights not maybe showing this as well, but they have competing priorities. There's always a very full curriculum. As somebody was running courses, hardly a week goes by without somebody saying, we'd like to put this extra into the curriculum, we'd like to spend more time in that, this is heading for a crisis, we need to do more teaching in that, and they can't do it all. And if we knew that if we went and said, could you put another 10 hours into your curriculum on lymphedema or the lymphatic system, they'd just say no, get lost, go away. So again, we looked at what we needed. Question was asked, do different professions need different education? Does it need to be different levels? Does a doctor need something different from a nurse? And including the medical people within that group, overwhelmingly the answer was no. If we're talking about what does lymphedema look like, who's at risk of it, what information do they need, it was felt that basic education was appropriate for all professionals and it didn't need to be tailored to different groups. And we were aware that we often say that there's very little about lymphedema or the lymphatic system in any healthcare professional curriculum. It's not strictly true. There is quite a lot about the lymphatic system, but it tends to be focused on the immunity response to infection. It doesn't tend to address so much the role of the lymphatic system in picking up and transferring fluid, transferring fats, and the whole way it works to try and clear the body of these things. That tends to be what's missing. So one way around the curriculum problem was just highlighting where we could add in, where it was appropriate to add in things about these other aspects or functions of the lymphatic system. So identifying links to existing teaching, not taking more time. So when they're assessing patients, why aren't they looking for this? Why aren't they looking for changes in the tissue? Exercise is an opportunity to say it wasn't just a benefit to the heart, it wasn't just a benefit to the joints, it was also a benefit to the lymphatic system because. And compression, people were used to education around compression for vascular problems, for varicose veins and other things, so why not add lymphedema in there? So just to get a general awareness of treatment strategies. And then it was more, well, what do patients need by way of information? As long as the professional knows that, or knows where they can refer patients to, that's really all they need. So it made it much more simple, much more realistic, and going to require less demand of the healthcare educators. So this was why we started thinking about educational benchmarks. Every programme for healthcare education has benchmarks of one kind or another. And if you're starting a new programme, or if, as you're required to do, you're reviewing, revalidating the programme to prepare somebody for registration as a nurse, as a physiotherapist, it's always a good thing to say that you've looked at certain official documents and that you're meeting certain standards, that you've got all those components in. And there are established ones for the various professions. So it's felt if we could convince people that it was actually going to be a good thing, this was something in a slightly different area, a more specialist area, but for people to say, yes, they're meeting benchmarks in this, that and the other, then it was going to be seen as something positive. So in education, these are used to measure standards and the quality of courses. So we were trying to use them because there were gaps in the curriculum and it would help people identify them. If we ask questions, do you have this in the curriculum? Could the people doing your programme answer this question? If the answer was no, hopefully they would think about what they need to do to overcome that. But as well as trying to avoid asking too much of educators, we want to find a way of encouraging and supporting them to include it. So the benchmark statements were arrived at by, again, a long process of international consensus. We developed lots of statements on lots of topics, and again, people wanted everything included in this, and gradually we think, well, do generalists really need that? Does a newly qualified nurse really need it? And whatever, and it was cut back until we had 6 standards, but with several points within each of them that we hope people would meet to achieve that. So it was really all about basic understanding and getting that down to the very bare bones of what would help people. We also hope that by doing that, and people get some understanding, some knowledge, they'll be interested. They'll meet people like yourselves who have these problems, they'll know something about it, but they'll be encouraged to actually look for more. Obviously it takes a long time, it takes several years to train a healthcare professional. They get into practice. All these thousands of people that are in the population already in practice still need some education, but over time that should be less instead of the basics, or you should be able to spend more time in more higher level knowledge, higher level skills. But rather than running a short course or a seminar for a group of community nurses who you might get 10 or 12 in a room at one time, you're going to be able to reach 100 nurses, 250 doctors at any one time, and as long as you're doing that consistently, over time, that level of basic understanding will continue to rise step by step until we're actually getting somewhere. So it's very much the building blocks, it's very ABC, very simple, and all about prevention, all about early detection, understanding what it is, and understanding what kind of treatment is available. Because people still think there's not much you can do about lymphedema. People still think there's not much you can do with lipödema, but we know that there's something that can make people feel better, can help patients take more control, manage their own situation, and if more specialist treatment is needed, there are things available. So we're trying to encourage people to think this is something helpful when they're developing a new programme, rather than a burden that we are enforcing on them. So where are we now? We have 6 statements produced and learning outcomes to go with them. It's on the International Lymphoedema Framework website, and there is a guide to that, how to use it. There is a plan to add some resources to it, so that even if a medical person responsible for teaching that part of the curriculum and wants to introduce it, they don't need to know all the answers themselves. There'll be links to short film clips, there'll be links to quizzes that they can refer their students to, so that they can do some self-learning, all sorts of things. That will take time, but that's the plan to do that. So the next thing to do, now that we have them, is actually to disseminate and promote that. We want to do that through the lymphedema community as much as possible, but we want to make sure we get it to those people responsible for general education, clinicians and educators. We want to encourage educators to check their teaching programmes against the standards, and we want people, some which would be yourselves, other professionals, who will be champions, who will promote it, because you don't just tell people about something once and then everything changes. You need to keep going back, keep reminding them what's happening with this, and saying, have you thought about that, question them. So we need to have some champions who are going to take that up for us. This is what the ILM website looks like. So there are various questions about how you use it, you can click onto. It's got each of the statements. There is a sample assessment, but hopefully there'll be more to come. But even without that, I think there is a value just now in getting people to look at them, getting people to think, does their programme cover it, or does it not? There's also explanation on it, because why should people do this? So you want to give them a reason why it might be worthwhile to do this, and we all know that with a population that people are getting older, we do tend to, in the West, have more problems with obesity. There'll be more older people who have more healthcare, chronic healthcare problems, who are perhaps less fit, less mobile, which are all risk factors for a poorly functioning lymphatic system. So unless we start doing this now, there will be a problem, and the health services won't be able to cope with it. So in approaching how we get this message out there, how we start encouraging them to use it, we're asking people in different countries, different areas, to choose a time that might be good for them to launch, that might coincide with some conferences, some meetings. It might be, it's probably a good time to be doing it at the start of the year, when people are thinking about planning next year's programme, because in education you have to do things way in advance, as you do for conferences. Determine your own list of who needs to be contacted. I need to cover all healthcare professions, so it needs to be people through university, through professional associations, any key organisations. Now, I don't know what the key organisations are in Sweden, so we're really relying on the champions there to think about it. And do you know what I mean by snowballing out? Sending it on to somebody else, and can you think of anybody else that should go to? and getting it stretching far and wide. There will be a letter which will be a rough template that people can use to inform people about it, but again, that may need to be changed to suit your political context, to suit the way your health service works, and that can be linked to the LEMS itself. Encourage people to ask questions about the programme that they're running, and then also we would suggest that there's some kind of social media campaign. And the good thing for the International Lymphoedema Framework, if countries, we had thought we'd get everybody to do it together, but if each area, each country does it at a separate time, it actually gives another opportunity for the ILF to say, look, it's been taken up in Sweden now, it's happening in Norway, and whatever. So that's probably a good way to do it, and it probably needs to be done again and again and again.